So the Zeigarnik effect is where the brain remembers interrupted or uncompleted tasks better compared to finished ones. And I guess before I go into why, I'm interested why you think that might be.
Uh, usual caveats of I'm not an expert, yada, yada, yada. But what does make sense to me is the mind likes finished loops. So it likes, if you give I don't know, the brain a story or a task, it likes it to be completed. And if you don't complete it, it bugs part of your attention. Like, and I get that. I got that from, I believe, Cal Newport's work on productivity, when he was talking about the danger of task switching. Because let's say you're trying to write your uni dissertation, as me and Jacob are at the moment, and then you get an email pop up, notification on your MacBook or your laptop or whatever, and you look at the email and it's about some event in 3 weeks' time that you're going to with your friends, right? Maybe you've got tickets for a show or whatever. Your brain, a small part of your attention will start thinking about, oh, I need to remind my friends about those tickets. And even if you look at that email for 15 seconds and then go back to your essay, there will still be a part of your brain that is focusing its attention on that loop you've just opened of seeing the stimulus of the email. I now need to act out some sort of behavioral response of reminding my friends about the concert, whatever it is. So we like completion. We do, especially, if you start somebody, imagine if I told you like the first half of a story and just left you before the climax and before it's resolved. There'd be a part of your attention still hinged upon my story. So this effect makes sense to me in that we'll remember the fact we hadn't finished that loop, or that task we started wasn't finished. When we complete something, maybe it's easier to let it go in memory.
Yeah, I think yeah, because that's the interesting thing about it. It specifically points to memory being worse when that thing's completed. So it's like once we've done, we almost like we put it to the back of our mind, and it's not something that we're constantly in right now. It's not like a present thing anymore. I guess it's in the past. So that would make sense. It kind of, and with your email example, it's like, say, when you're doing your essay, an email pops up, and then you read the email, you respond to it, then you go back to your essay. I think that's why, like, so your memory's been like you're kind of in a state of kind of like half remembering both and kind of keeping like tabs open in your mind. And then
That's
I
it.
think
There is
what's
a
really
word for it. I can't remember
Mm.
the word for it, but it's that fractionated attention. Maybe people can comment, what this is, but I know it's a thing. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I think we go about our lives with a couple tabs open in our mind, like with how many things that we're constantly trying to remember. It's like when I used to work in restaurants, it was totally like that, where you'd be delivering food, and then you had someone on the way to delivering that food ask you about something. And then you had your staff member ask you for some help here. And now you've got three things at once, three tabs open in your mind that you need to complete. But you can kind of manage it because, like this effect says, you can kind of your memory is constantly still trying to remember things between them. And I guess it might explain like why uh I guess I'm trying to think, because I do find myself sometimes uh in that dark uni student like situation where like I read the email, now I'm looking at my Word document, and there's just like my mouth is just ticking at me, and it's just a like when you're staring at your Word document with a mouse ticking, like it's just kind of dark, like and you then like need to somehow go back to what you were remembering like 10 minutes ago, and then
Mm.
try and then that takes so long, and then you finally have to redraw that, and then you finally like it. I don't know, I feels like there's a way to like kind of optimize your like mind circuit, which I don't know if like I always do.
Yeah, I think. Look, don't get me wrong. There might be some people that can thrive in chaos and can exist with multiple tabs open in their mind, keeping that like that analogy going. And they can, I know people that would like to do work when there's lots of noise around. And I've never understood that. That just doesn't really work for me. But some people, they like the hustle and bustle of a coffee shop, or like a classroom, or just people's voices here and there, and you can't really hear distinct parts of people's conversations. It's just like a hum of noise, but that gets them to concentrate. Whereas I'm very like, I like to be dialed in on a single, like my attention focused on a single unit of experience. Um, and I got this from, it's actually an idea from, I mean, the guy who wrote this book, I don't like him. He's a bit of a charlatan and there's some dodgy things about him, but a guy called Jay Shetty, he's got a very popular podcast, used to be a monk, whatever. He wrote a book called Think Like a Monk. And I listened to the audiobook back in lockdown, like when I was starting to have some spiritual realizations, to use a horrible, cheesy term. But one of the things he talked about was single tasking leading to mental clarity. How we're always so distracted. And like, I don't want it to seem in any way like I have this stuff figured out. Because like you say, I fall prey to this stuff all the time. But I know, and I know this also from Cal Newport's book, Deep Work and So Good They Can't Ignore You, on sort of productivity, that like funneling your attention on a single task and doing it deliberately and conscientiously leads you to the best results in the quickest time. And it's a skill you can build, like it's getting rid of those tabs in your brain is bloody hard to do, and not letting distraction come through is difficult to do also. But there are some sort of like systemic techniques you can use on your devices to try and put a barrier up against that. But yeah, it's an important thing for people to know.
With the music and like coffee shop thing, is that because you're like focused on a single noise that like for you it works better to have some study music on in the background that's just like singular on a consistent beat, rather than like the odd thing that the table next to you yaps and you get a little bit of it?
I wonder if it's a bit of conditioning that like I've listened to like piano and classical music while studying now for like years, that when I put that kind of music on, I just go into that concentration state. Don't know. That's very unscientific, but go on.
Associative conditioning.
Yeah, like classical conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning. That's kind of association I've drawn between the music and the brain state, or the state of concentration. And socially, I really like, if I'm sat with somebody without my headphones on trying to work, I just the rate of output is so much lower, because I'm quite like, especially with someone I really like, I'm quite a social person in that way, and I'll just get distracted trying to have a conversation with them. So
That's good. You can use. Sorry.
Yeah, at least I know that about myself. Like, what were you going to say?
You can use Pavlovian conditioning to make you better at studying. You can associate. You can associate the place. So when you go to this place and you put on this music, you study, and then when you go to that place and someone tries to distract you, you're already conditioned to work, so you're going to ignore that and you're going to carry on. Like you can associative like things are very powerful to like, this is the music that I listen to when I study, so when this music comes on I study.
Well, it's something that, like, when I was doing my A-levels and really trying academically, the study YouTubers would talk about this idea of studying in the same place always, and creating a sacred space, whether that's a desk in your room or a certain cafe or whatever. I think there's something to that. And there's also something that Cal Newport wrote about. He coined this term, I think, of a deep work ritual. It becomes ritualistic. Same place, preferably same time. You have your same cup of coffee next to you. You play the same music if you want it, or you have the same kind of peace and silence if you can create it, that gets you into a mode to be effective. And this is interesting because this conversation does link into one of my points from today. But we can get onto that in a second. But yeah, I think this is very useful stuff to know.
Yeah. You can go into one of your points actually.
So what this initial warm-up question is all feeding towards for me, which I like, is this like kind of, I want to use the term monastic, and I'll get into why I'm using that in a second, but this monastic, like parts of the monastic life that are useful in the modern day. And monastic, I'm using it in terms of how monks might live, a very religious, solitary, devoted, disciplined way of life. Because what I've been thinking about over the past sort of week or so is how sometimes as an athlete, I do think that my routine is quite monastic. And I actually think it could be quite useful for me and maybe other athletes or people striving for high performance. It might be quite useful for us to think about some of our routines in a like monastic, ritualistic fashion. And like I said, with what Cal Newport said in Deep Work, it was about that consistency, calmness, uh, and the discipline that required to kind of curate the conditions for flow and effective work to come through. Um, and I'm kind of applying those same principles to the sporting world because yes, I'm a team sport athlete, so I do train with team members like multiple times a week. But I also have a handful of sessions when I do spend it alone, and it is solitary and repetitive, and it brings out the state of meditative flow if the training is of the right intensity or has the right focus to it. And I think seeing that as a ritual allows me to show up like each day to my training with the same kind of peace, contentment, but also focus. And it's like instead of devoting to a religion or a god like a monk would, I'm devoting myself to the art or the game of basketball and losing myself in that craft during that ritual, giving up my ego in order to try and learn and perfect a certain skill. Um, and yeah, I think that mastery itself is a spiritual pursuit. So potentially the best way to pursue it and move towards it is through curating your practice to be like a spiritual ritual. I don't know. I'm just playing with ideas. Do you have anything now while I pause?
Yeah, I'm thinking about those guys. Like, if you're one of those guys that wakes up at 4 a.m. and is in the gym and then starts studying the library like very early, like you're like a monk. Like you're very on your own solitude. Like yeah, you're very in solitude and you're very disciplined, and there's a lot of similarities with the monk lifestyle there. Like you're kind of get waking up, you're doing your practices every day, and you're showing up, and you're doing it alone, which I think is a powerful thing. Like to be so different from everyone else and to do it alone, like yeah, I respect those guys, and you don't see those guys either. Like you don't really know that those people are out there doing it. It's kind of like you in the first year when you'd go to the sports hall to play wheelchair basketball.
Well, I don't know. Pivoting a little bit, but tell me what you think about this, Jacob. Do you think that we have like a natural desire for something to be a ritual? Like
And what do you mean
we
by
like so like an action or a practice that we do consistently and it has some kind of significance and it matters to us, potentially on a spiritual level, and it evokes a certain emotion or a flow state in us. Um, and we do it for a large, grand, significant reason. Like, often it's used, yes, in religious and spiritual contexts, but I think a lot of people have a ritual. Like, and I think if you don't, you should find one because it's really powerful. And those gym bros that you're talking about that will get up and be in the gym at 5, there is something ritualistic to that. It takes discipline, it takes consistency, it means something to them. They derive a great amount of meaning from it. And whether it's that, you have a yoga practice or you like dance or you like some kind of art or it's a sport or I just think people should should strive for ritual because it's like a consistent source of meaning and it gives your life structure. And what do you think about that?
I think that some people might have rituals and they might not know it. There might be unhealthy rituals because they can be what satanic rituals as well, right? And
Mm.
things like that. So I think what you do every day, you're mundane. Like if I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a bad example of a ritual. I reckon someone that goes like to that one student that goes to lectures and just like scrolls on reels for like 2 hours and then goes to her next lecture and then scrolls on reels like that is her ritual, and like it, it it's something that she does often, but but treats it like it's a normal practice. So I think there's bad ones as well. I think I think there's a decent amount of people who have like hobbies and shit, and people that are going to societies that are like very into. I think a sport's a very big one. People can find that very quickly and through sport, which I think's why it's so important for people to get into that. But yeah, any type of hobby, I think we do need it because if we don't, then we kind of just fade into being a consumer and not a creator. And when we're kind of talking about this like 4 p.m., 4 a.m. type of stuff, I feel like the biggest advantage of waking up at 4 a.m. is that you're kind of like ahead of everyone else who's still asleep. You're you're conquering the day first before anyone else. All the lights are off. I mean, you've done that for quite a decent amount of period, so I'd be interested what you think about that.
Well,
Um,
like, don't get me wrong, I can't, I wouldn't choose that. I had times where I was getting up at 6 and I had that routinely, but now it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit because I come in late from training sessions and things, and I just can't sacrifice sleep. I'm not somebody that can exist very well on low sleep. Like, I'm terrible on a bad night's sleep. But if it works for people, it works. You know, if it gives them that meaning and it gives that feeling of significance behind their life and their routine, that's really important. But one thing I was thinking about while you were talking, and you used that example of somebody who goes to a lecture and scrolls on TikTok or whatever. I don't know if that's a ritual, because what's the difference between a habit and a ritual? Because we all have habits, right? We all hopefully brush our teeth at the beginning and the end of the day, and we shower, and we, I don't know, have a pretty consistent breakfast most days, or we have certain habits with, I don't know, the way we get dressed in the morning. We have things that we do every day, but they're not all rituals. Like brushing my teeth, I do it every day. It's a habit, but it's not a ritual. So what's the difference between those two? I think it's something to do with significance and like deep meaning behind the action. That's what makes something a ritual.
because a habit doesn't really have deep meaning or significance.
Because I think the person in the lecture that ends up scrolling on TikTok, they're doing that because that's the path of least resistance. Like that's the easy thing to do rather than listen or concentrate or contribute. It's just psychologically easy to just numb themselves through consumption, right? And that the dopamine or whatever that comes with that. A ritual isn't necessarily an easy thing that you just do. If anything, a ritual is going against the path of least resistance, and it involves overcoming some kind of obstacle. Like I would say someone who, I don't know, like the gym is a good example. There's something more to in me that thinks that's more of a ritual because of the discipline it requires. Because to a lot of people, it becomes a big like cornerstone of their life. Like it becomes their rock. If they really get into it, it can become a big part of their like desires and personality. You know, guys, I knew guys in school that would get into like the gym and bodybuilding, and it's all they could think about at night, and they would obsess over the grams of protein they were eating in the day and the calories they had and their training program, and they'd watch great YouTube videos and fitness influencers. Like it would almost possess them because it mattered so much. And that gym session, those 1-2 hours a day where they would go and train, became like a religious and spiritual task. That's what I'm kind of getting at. Does that clear it up a bit more for you?
Yeah, because I think it could be a ritual if like you go to the lecture and you like actually try. Like if it I think the variables are consistency, the meaning, the improvement and
Yeah,
the
effort required. Yeah, effort and discipline. Yeah.
kind of mastery, I guess, yeah. That separated from a habit. Because there's not really much mastery in a habit. Like mm, so yeah, I think that's good.
And I think ritualizing, if that's a word that I've just coined in this moment, but ritualizing your practice for something you want to get good at can be really powerful. I think that's the like TLDR that I'd want to get across to my own brain and to you and to anyone listening who finds it valuable. that, like, whether it's your uni work or anything to do with your job that you want to improve at, or a sport or a hobby, if you want to get really good, I mean, it's something that Cal Newport again wrote about called deliberate practice, but make it a conscious, focused, intense, short period of time that you devote a lot of your energy and attention into, and it matters to you and it's meaningful and it requires effort and discipline, but you can feel that what you're doing is moving you towards your goal. That's turning your work into a ritual. That's taking a
Mm.
monastic approach to it. And that's kind of what I wanted to say about, being
Yeah.
an athlete. And it was just, it hit me on one Thursday where, like, I went to a court, I did some shooting and some ball skills and some chair skill stuff for an hour. I then, like, got changed, ate my food, drove for another hour and a half to another training session, trained for another 2 hours with people. It was like, I just felt like there was something beautiful in the routine of that's the same, that day every week I do the same thing.
Mm.
Um, and mastery is not really an external thing. Like, the external thing is the pathway with which mastery is achieved. But, like, if you wanted to master the game of chess and I wanted to master the game of basketball, we would probably have similar experiences of how meaningful it is. So the external thing we're doing is not what's important. It's the spiritual internal change. It's about who you become. It's about the character, the skill, the virtue, the resilience, the humility you have to acquire to do that thing at that high level. And so mastery is a spiritual pursuit.
Tell me about your point on religion.
Yeah, so I'm very hesitant about this because it's just I don't want it to fall into the trap of is Joel just ranting about God again? But from what I've been reading in Richard Dawkins' book, which I haven't made loads of progress on because I've been so bloody busy, but it sparked some ideas, and I feel like I now have some clarity on, like, or some progress, let's say, on the way I think about the term. And maybe, yeah, that could bounce some ideas of some things that you've also thought about recently. I don't know. And it also combines, even though he exists maybe on the opposite end of a kind of spectrum, is Peterson's ideas kind of find their way slithering into all of this stuff. But yeah, anyway, so I've realized that the God I believe in right now in this time of my life is metaphorical. Um, and it's a term that encapsulates a mystery that cannot be known factually. So it can only be referred to figuratively through a metaphor, right? It is that quote that God is the blanket we place over the mystery to give it shape. It's a term that points to something about reality that I don't understand and I don't believe we can understand, but it is there. And God isn't real in the same way that dragons aren't real, which is where I slither in Peterson's point, that they don't physically exist like my cup on this table does, but they exist in the world of imagination, in the world of story. They exist in the world of the psyche, right? They exist in the internal world that Carl Jung barks on about so wisely. And so they matter to us because that's the world that we operate in psychologically. And there is value in exploring the way that these concepts, right, like God and like a dragon, affect consciousness. And so let's dig into this similarity between the two terms for a second. So, Peterson waffled on and people joked about it, but I kind of see what he's trying to get at in that dragon is like the archetypal predator because it combines all the characteristics of the most ferocious predators come together: wings, scales, fire breathing, claws, etc. And so if you believe in the term predator, you believe in a dragon. But that's, that we're getting into gray, murky water there that I don't know where I stand on that. But what I'm saying is I agree with the fact that we can view a dragon as a concept that represents, like, the ultimate predator. And so if we imagine a hierarchy of predators, what's at the top of that, even though it may not physically exist, is a dragon because it is the hypothetical maximal predator, right? What I think God is if you built that hierarchy, but rather than predators, it's all good things, all loving things, all the things that make life feel meaningful and significant. The top of that hierarchy, that's what it is. That's what I'm referring to when I use that term. And I don't quite know what that is, but I know it exists. because I know that good exists, and I know that love exists, and I know that meaning exists. And so whatever is the maximum of that, that's what I'm referring to. But it's not a physical thing. It's a metaphor. I can only talk about it figuratively. And I can only talk about it and knowing that it's there because I feel it. And I've had a sense of it in different psychoactive experiences and also just things in my sober life as well. Just like I get a sense sometimes that there is this good loving force that runs through the things we do and the ways that we feel when we're with certain people or doing certain things. So God is like this apex archetype representing the good, right? The ultimate definition of the good. And so it's not the one in religious stories. So I'm not a religious person, but I see that religion is pointing towards the same thing that we can only talk about figuratively. That same loving force, that same good force, that's what they're writing about. And the way that we talk on the podcast and the prep that we do and the theories that we evaluate and the ideas that we try and put together, I think we're doing a similar thing to what the people that made the religions in the beginning did. They're trying to figure out what the thing is. And even though it's too big for the intellectual mind to wrap its head around, it's too big to represent in a human consciousness, they're still just trying, and they do it through story. They do it through morals. They do it through great characters and people and prophets that represent that force. But it's not the thing. And so, and that's where I thought I would read Dawkins and I would be worried that he would shut down all my theories. But actually, that hasn't happened because he says that he also believes in this metaphorical God. And many great intellectuals like Einstein and Stephen Hawking have also mentioned this God in their work. But what they're doing is they're using a metaphor for the power of nature and the power of the universe. And I'm with them on that. But he draws the line on God being a person or a personal God, an anthropomorphic God, a God that makes judgments and can physically be in front of your eyes. And so I get it. It's the ultimate ideal, but it's not a thing that I can touch or sense. And I just want to finish with this one thing that I really love. There's an interview. I might send it to you once if you've not seen it before on YouTube. And it's like the one video I found of Jung being interviewed. And he gets asked, like, does he believe in God? And he just goes, I do not have to believe. I know. And because he knows that good, loving force exists. But yeah, I mean, this is, we're getting into the abstract here, but I just wanted to make that statement because different people, even in my personal life that have heard bits on the podcast, will then go and ask me, I heard you talk about this. Are you religious? And I don't like that question. So as things stand on the 1st of April, 2026, this is where I am.
It's interesting, lastly, when you said how Dawkins kind of believes it as a metaphor and sees that, because there are some of the greatest scientists like Einstein and Newton, to name a couple, they believe in God.
But that's what the chapter. So in the chapter, he breaks down what Einstein was talking about, and what Dawkins writes is that Einstein didn't believe in the personal God of the religions, but he believed in the God as the force that created the universe that we don't quite understand. And so Dawkins actually uses the term like an Einsteinian God, the God of Einstein. And I agree with it, which makes me sad because I kind of wanted to disagree with him, but he's just, I get it. It makes sense to me. But I guess I'll just finish with this, sorry, before you go. What I will argue then in my career, I guess, if I continue talking about these ideas is that, okay, the metaphorical God may not be true in the like scientific objective sense, but embodying that metaphor or having that metaphor in your consciousness behind the things you do and the way you approach life is beneficial. That's going to be my theory. Anyway, go on.
Okay, I think because I'm on similar lines to you where religion and God are kind of two different things. You've kind of got God at the top of the hierarchy and somewhere religion in the middle. And I've just finished Nietzsche's chapter on religion, and a lot of his thoughts make sense. I kind of end up resonating a lot with you that essentially instead of treating religion as the end, it's more the means to the middle. In the way that It, it's a path. It's like a tool that a craftsman can use to get to God at the end. And I think that's where we stand with religion right now. The Nietzsche quote that did slap me in the face was that Nietzsche said the deeper something is, the more illusions are painted over that thing. And if you think of the things that you mentioned there, love, wisdom, God, they're very deep things, and therefore
They're the deep things.
they are the deepest things. So the more illusions are painted over them. And therefore, if God is the deepest thing, then isn't religion just the illusion over it? That's kind of the negative way of viewing religion. And I think I think we have to really think about, do we, because I've tried to see if if any of the religions really resonate with me these last couple of months, and I haven't had an answer. I can't fully get into them. It just doesn't feel right. So, but the argument against that is like, it's kind of like mad when you have prophets like Jesus and Muhammad, and you're like, these people, they are kind of speaking the truth. They are kind of like speaking something quite. They're kind of onto something here, and that's where I kind of go back into religion and be like, okay, this is quite interesting to look at Jesus and like how these people are maybe the truth. And that's why I think we can right now. I think the right thing to do is to think of religion as a tool, but not the end.
I think you've put that beautifully.
Mm,
I've never heard that before. That specific term of it's a tool, but there is some real utility in thinking about it that way, because it works for some people. It works for a lot of people, but
mm,
it also doesn't work for a lot of people, and it doesn't fully work for me. And so and then I go, what could my tool be? Sport? Could my tool be writing and reading? And that's my tool, where I try and find out what these deep things are and try and experience these deep things. And everyone can decide what tool they want to use. And also, I think the term tool is good, because a tool in the wrong hands can be destructive, in the same way that religious ideas in the wrong hands can be very destructive. But that,
mm,
you can use a hammer to put up a beautiful picture of your family, but you can also use a hammer to brutally murder someone. That
mm,
doesn't mean the hammer is a good or bad tool. It's the way you use it. In the same way that religion can be a beautiful thing that enriches people's lives and increases love and happiness and community, but it can also lead to distraction and a lot of corruption and derogatory ways about thinking, derogatory ways of thinking about others, which is a very real thing, and it's just why it gets packaged in the way it does in this modern day. But it's a tool, and that's why delving into the ideas of some prophets and seeing what we can draw. I mean, as people may know, and you definitely know, my dissertation is on people that are spiritual without religion. But one of these writers, I forgot her name. I want to say her name's Besecki, Besecke. This woman who wrote this book about reflexive spirituality. She said that one of the key characteristics of these people that identify in this way is they do engage with religious texts, but in an interpretive way. They don't take it as literal. They see it as the tool that it is. So they draw some value from the metaphors. They see some morals in the stories, but they do not just conform to it as literal truth. And I think that's the approach that definitely we're taking, and that I would suggest to others if it works for them. So
mm.
I think we've come to a good little breakthrough there, which I like.
Because as a high performer yourself, and yeah, as a high performer, your life is diverse and it's difficult to determine, and it's kind of delicate in places. And that's not what Christianity promotes. Christianity would um it wouldn't promote this kind of like the same high performance strength. That's one of Nietzsche's big messages, is like Christianity's project is to help the weak and the sick and the suffering. And to do so, you have to kind of invert your value system, that would otherwise allow you to flourish. And so, yeah, it told the strong that their strength, ambition, beauty, and dominance were sins. Um, and it made the exceptional man ashamed of what made him exceptional. That's Nietzsche's words. So there's a part of it that doesn't fit into our lives right now. Um, and therefore we have to kind of wrestle with these ideas. The other interpretation of the quotes about how religion's an illusion is that um, the so the quote was that the profoundest things have more layers of illusion painted over them. Therefore, isn't religion just a illusion for God? And the second interpretation is that the perfect disguise, wouldn't it be to just hide God in the ordinary rather than this big grandeur thing? Wouldn't it be to hide God in this smallness? Which I thought was a very good interpretation from Nietzsche.
Well, I don't know if this is the correct interpretation of the quote, but what came to me is when Jung said, most people don't find God because they don't look low enough.
And I think the thing about God is it's top down and bottom up, is that it is potentially this, because you can, I think about that quote as like not looking low enough, as you haven't been through enough struggle, maybe. You haven't put yourself into lower situations, or you haven't sort of messed up as much to then find God and have that kind of miracle and bounce back from rock bottom. But I think God is top, because that I think there is definitely something in that God is bottom up, in that like the little small things we do, but he's also can be top down, and that is that
Because he is the
ultimate North
creator.
Star.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's because I can't, that's where I stand with it at the moment. Yeah, I think I am kind of also like you in the way that I can't right now. I haven't got that feeling that religion feels right. So what I have to do is read all the Christian texts to then logically be like, this is something that I want to adopt. And because I haven't done that, I'm kind of in a purgatory where I kind of get the good idea and I'm trying to embed it in my life, but I don't quite understand enough of the religion. Yeah.
I want to just come back to a theme that's run through a lot of what we've done over the last few months, and it's this idea of how do we play and win the game ethically as, young, ambitious men in a Western society who want to strive for a level of individualized success and high performance. But how do we do that with our moral code intact and in a position where if we did meet God at the end of our life, we could explain why we made the decisions we made? I think religion gives you a rule book of how to play and win the game ethically, but it doesn't resonate with us for whatever reason. And so we can take bits of what it says, but also we can take bits from philosophers, but also we can take bits that our parents have taught us, or we can take bits from modern culture that we resonate with, thinkers of today's time, writers, speakers, people that have done remarkable things. And all these little nuggets of wisdom that we gain from guests we talk about on the podcast or discussions that me and you have, all these nuggets come together like little pieces of a puzzle and put together our map of how we play and win the game of life ethically and with virtue and with character. But I don't want to. It's kind of like I don't want to place all my bets on one rule book, because if that rule book turns out to be wrong, then I've gone all in on the wrong thing. It's like, have you ever seen a quiz on TV called the £1 Million Drop, where like
No.
there'll be a multiple choice question, a series of multiple choice questions, and at the start the contestant begins with £1 million, and there'll be option A, B, C, or D, and they're pretty sure the answer is C, but they'll still put a little bit of cash on the other answers So that if C is wrong, and basically all the wrong answers, the money goes into the void, and the money that's on the correct answer stays there. Basically, that's why it's called the £1 million drop. They'll still place little bits of money on the answers they don't think are right, just in case. That's how I am. I don't want to put all my money, all my stakes of my spiritual views in one lane, because there might be some things that I disagree with in it. And I don't want to go all in on one thing. I don't want to be unidimensional. I want to take, well, what did my mum tell me when I was a kid about this? And what does this philosopher say from back in the day? And what did this guest on the podcast say? And what do I feel in my intuition based on experiences I've had? And I want all these little puzzle pieces to come together to build my worldview. And maybe I'm a product of the individualistic culture that I live in, and that, really I should devote myself to Jesus or whatever to really be saved or whatever. But that idea of taking pieces from here, there, and everywhere, interpreting them, understanding the value, drawing out what I can, that makes the most sense to me. And then by the end of my life, I will have my own idea of how to play the game. And hopefully then, if I do have to stand in front of the creator when I leave this earth, I will have a story to tell. And I hope it's good enough.
It's like when you're doing an essay and you got to like accumulate different bits of data and you got to triangulate it to then find like a conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I yeah, I was thinking, how is the Bible and the Quran the closest thing we have to a rule book? Because there's no right way to live your life, but we have these things that are kind of like they're an answer. So they should be like some kind of like proportion. And that's why I think it is kind of good for every human to read those things, because they're the closest answer. Like,
And you have to be able to separate the value from the absolute trovel, because there is that in it, like, I don't know, my understanding of Islam is very, very brief, but like the fact that they don't go near alcohol, okay, there's value in that. I can see it. It's an intoxicant. It doesn't really feel good when I drink it. I don't think it does good things to people. So I get that. There's some value and there's some truth in it. But the way that the Quran may talk about gender or talk about marriage, well, no, that does not resonate with me. So I can separate that into the pile of, that's not for me, thanks. And that's probably, I'm pretty sure that's not right. But I can take the value from it. And maybe that's the new wave of how our generation or the generations after us are going to think about religion. In that, okay, that had some truth to it. That did some good for some people, but we have to see what we want to drop and what we want to pick up. But then maybe, we can, the line, where that line is placed, can be controversial, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't want to disgrace anyone's religion here. But what I'm saying is, the individual, like, it comes back to the individual and what they draw, I think. And that's going to be and that's what the demographic I'm studying with my dissertation are doing. Spirituality without religion. That doesn't necessarily mean that they think religion is terrible. It just doesn't quite resonate. But some of the ideas do, and some of the ideas from religion still ring true in their own philosophies. But they found it their own way.
I think the argument against this is like, I don't know if practically this is like a solidified, easy to create a solidified value structure if we're constantly taking things from everywhere. Like, it's kind of like Kierkegaard's either or, in that how you will either go towards the path of enlightenment, and he kind of links religion into that, or you'd go to a path of like individualization, being more individualistic, because I guess, like, who are we to think that we have the answers when there's potentially like a God-sent book that we can commit to that has maybe a better answer. But that's me playing devil's advocate, because I do agree with you. Like, I think like, when you read how Muslims why they don't eat pork, and you understand like pigs are kind of a little bit dirty animals and they eat like not the best food, and they're actually kind of like, the way that they grow up is like, it's in a lot of like dirt and it's not very healthy, and it's got this kind of like message that backs up in the Quran, and and you understand that idea, and you can kind of like question your own morality. Like, should I be eating pork right now? Because this kind of resonates with me. So, um, I get the idea. I don't really know. Like, I think there comes a time in our life, like maybe the afternoon or the evening, where we've done all of this exploring and then we commit. Because I don't know if you can kind of like be on the fence for like forever.
Mm. Well, I know that reminded me, as you were saying there, of Wim Hof, who I don't really follow him as much as I used to these days, but he was kind of the prophet that led me towards the utility of cold showers and breath work and some aspects of spirituality, right? But I remember him talking about his story, and he said as a young person, he was reading all the texts and trying to figure out where his truth was and what was his North Star. How was he supposed to think about his soul and its relation to the wider universe? And he said when he got into a cold lake and he was hit with that physiological but also spiritual shock that he was alive and he was an organism in the world with its own, I don't know, desires and drives. I mean, he said he felt the most alive he's ever felt, right? Maybe we're just looking for that moment. And maybe in 10 years' time, we'll come back onto a podcast and be like, "Oh, do you remember 10 years ago I was talking about me being a spiritual slag and just picking up ideas from different areas and all that?" And now I'll be like, "Well, now I've changed and I'm coming to this path." Maybe I will, but
Mm.
maybe this is all just part of the journey, you know? This is just a necessary stage of being young and impressionable and being open. I mean, we're
Mm.
called, we're cheesily called Open Minded Podcast for a reason. So I don't know.
So you reckon you like Wim Hof had to read all of that to get to that answer of like going in the cold plunge and
Maybe, maybe, I don't know. I
mm,
just used him as an example of when you were saying that at some point in our life, we may renounce everything else and commit to a single path. Maybe.
like reading it still has its value.
Mm.
Yeah, it's food for thought, and it's um good ways to frame things. Yeah. Okay, I think we should wrap this one up. We've done an hour.
100.
Um, thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with a guest episode.
Yes, we will. Cool. Thanks, everyone.